Have you ever sat in silence while someone disrespected you, thinking they got away with it, just because you didn't react? That burning moment when your heart knows the truth, but your mouth stays shut. They think you didn't notice. They think your silence means you're blind. But deep down you know you saw everything, every lie, every shift in tone, every fake smile. You picked up on it all. You just didn't say a word. And that silence, that wasn't weakness. That was power gathering. Sometimes the loudest statement you'll ever make is the one you never say out loud. Because there's something about silence that speaks directly to the soul. It's not empty, it's not absence, it's control. It's clarity, it's restraint. And while they thought they were outsmarting you, they had no idea you were wide awake. Watching, processing, remembering. Every moment you didn't speak was a choice, a decision to protect your energy, to keep your dignity, to stay rooted in your truth. They wanted you to explode, to argue, to fall apart, because that would have proven to them that they still had power over you, but instead you gave them nothing. And in that nothing, they revealed everything. Your silence unsettled them. It made them uncomfortable. Because people who thrive on control can't stand when you don't give them a reaction. But here's what they don't realize. You were never silent because you didn't know. You were silent because you did. Let that sink in. You saw the way they twisted the truth. You caught the inconsistencies. You felt the shift in their energy when they started pulling away. You noticed how they stopped clapping when you succeeded. You saw how they celebrated your struggle quietly behind your back. And you didn't need to confront them. You didn't need to prove them wrong. Because some betrayals are not meant to be addressed. They're meant to be outgrown. You are not here to entertain lies. You're here to evolve. And the moment you choose silence over chaos, you step into a different kind of strength. A strength that doesn't perform, a strength that doesn't seek revenge, a strength that builds in the dark, without permission, without applause. And when it finally emerges, it doesn't scream, it simply arrives. Unapologetic, unshakable, unstoppable. Stay here, keep listening, because what comes next is not about them, it's about you. It's about reclaiming your voice without even raising it. It's about understanding that silence is not surrender. It's a setup for transformation. By the end of this, you won't just feel understood. You'll feel armed, armed with clarity, armed with truth, armed with the calm that makes storms irrelevant. The kind of calm that doesn't just change how people see you, it changes what they can never do to you again. They thought you didn't say anything because you didn't see anything, but you did. And now it's time to rise, not with noise, but with power. They underestimated you because you kept quiet. They assumed you didn't catch the lies wrapped in half smiles. They believed you were too naive to notice the way they shifted blame, dodged truth, and played roles. But what they never counted on was your ability to observe without reacting, to absorb without confronting, to collect every moment in silence, like pieces of a puzzle slowly forming the full picture. And while they kept performing, you kept processing. That's the difference between loud fools and silent warriors. You were never blind. You were just aware enough to wait. People expose themselves when they believe you're not watching. That's when the masks fall. That's when the truth leaks out between the lines. Because when someone thinks you're not paying attention, they get comfortable. Too comfortable. And comfort breeds carelessness. That's when they slip. That's when the truth becomes loud, even in whispers. And you caught it all. Not because you were desperate to know, but because you were grounded in stillness, sharp in silence, and unwilling to be played. This is the unseen advantage of being the quiet one in the room. You aren't distracted by noise. You aren't lured into arguments or tricks. You're tuned in, not to what they say, but to how they act. You study tone, timing, repetition, patterns. You recognize when words stop matching energy. You pick up on the subtle withdrawal of support, the fake congratulations, the sudden disinterest in your success. And while they thought you were too nice to notice, you were taking mental notes they never saw you write. They thought they had the upper hand. But the truth is, they gave you the blueprint. You didn't need to guess who they were. They showed you. Inconsistent behavior reveals more than long speeches ever could. And when they think you're not watching, they become exactly who they are. That's the moment you stop being confused. That's the moment you stop giving chances. That's the moment you stop shrinking yourself to keep the peace. Because peace without truth is just a prison with flowers on the walls. You don't need confrontation to reclaim your power. You just need clarity. And clarity is exactly what they handed you while they were too busy pretending. So when you go silent, It's not avoidance, it's preparation. You're preparing to detach, to elevate, to reset. And what they never saw coming was how deeply your silence was rewriting your story. Quiet doesn't mean passive, it means precise, strategic, focused. And when you finally act, you don't do it out of spite, you do it out of self-respect. Your silence was never empty. It was gathering power piece by piece. Every moment you didn't react was a brick in the foundation of your comeback. And when that comeback arrives, it won't ask for permission. It won't explain itself. It won't need validation. It will be undeniable, because you didn't need to speak to prove you saw it all. Now they will feel everything your silence prepared them for. They thought your silence was fear. They mistook your calm for submission. But here's the truth. They never understood your depth, because people who thrive on chaos can't comprehend someone who doesn't need to react. They expect rage, they expect noise. But when you give them nothing, when you remain composed, it unsettles them in ways they can't explain. They feel it in their bones. Because silence in the face of betrayal doesn't mean you're okay with it. It means you've already outgrown it. When someone believes they've gotten away with disrespect, they reveal their truest self. That's when they stop pretending. That's when their words stop aligning with their behavior. That's when their mask starts slipping, not because you exposed it, but because they no longer feel the need to hide. They think you're not paying attention, but you are, more than they know. And while they're busy underestimating you, you're witnessing every flaw, every inconsistency, every subtle shift that gives them away. This kind of awareness changes you. It doesn't harden you, it clarifies you. It strips away illusion, it ends confusion. Because once you truly see someone, there's no going back to who you were before. You no longer crave validation from them. You no longer seek closure. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to those who chose to misunderstand you. The silence you once held to protect peace becomes the silence that protects your power, and it builds quietly, relentlessly, until the weight of it is too loud for them to ignore. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't have to prove your worth to be valuable. You don't have to expose anyone to reclaim your peace. The moment you stop reacting, you start regaining control. And when that control takes root, it grows into self-respect, into boundaries, into emotional freedom. You realize that silence isn't just a lack of noise, it's a declaration, a refusal to be shaken. A decision to no longer entertain anything that insults your intelligence or disrupts your peace. That's the moment your silence becomes dangerous. Not to you, but to those who relied on your silence to keep doing what they were doing. Because now they feel it, the shift, the distance, the coldness that wasn't there before, and they'll wonder when it happened. But it didn't happen in a single moment. It happened over time. Every time they thought you didn't notice. Every time they disrespected your value, thinking you wouldn't respond. Every time you stayed silent, until silence became your decision, not your default. You never needed to explode. You only needed to awaken. And now that you have, there's no turning back. Let them feel the silence they created. Let them sit with the absence of the version of you that tolerated their games. You saw it all. You stayed silent. But now, your silence has become the loudest truth they can't ignore. You didn't fall silent because you were weak. You chose silence because you were tired of explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You realized the energy you were pouring into arguments, defenses, and second chances was energy they didn't deserve. Every time you held your tongue, it wasn't surrender, it was wisdom. Because what's the point of speaking to those who only hear what serves their ego? You weren't afraid to speak. You were refusing to waste your voice on people who had already decided not to listen. It's one of the most powerful shifts a person can make, knowing you don't owe anyone your words, especially when they've already shown they can't handle your truth. Some people don't want clarity, they want control. And silence threatens them, because silence means they can't manipulate the narrative. They can't twist your words. They can't play victim when there's nothing to respond to. That's why your calm is so dangerous to them. It exposes their chaos without you saying a single word. The strongest people aren't the loudest in the room. They're the ones who know when to walk away. They're the ones who see the betrayal, feel the hurt, and still choose not to become what tried to break them. You stayed composed not because it didn't matter, but because you finally understood your worth. And when you understand your worth, you stop explaining it. You stop begging others to see it. You stop trying to prove it. You simply embody it and let the rest fall away. That's when everything changes. That's when your silence becomes your protection, your clarity becomes your compass, your peace becomes your power. You stop trying to win people over, you stop trying to get them to admit what they did. You stop needing their apology to heal. You start choosing you, not in anger, not in pride, but in quiet, deliberate self-respect, the kind that doesn't seek revenge, the kind that doesn't need to be loud, the kind that radiates without performance. They expected noise. You gave them distance. They expected a fight. You gave them a boundary. They expected you to come back and explain yourself. You gave them silence that echoed louder than any closure they thought they deserved. And now they know. Now they feel it. The absence of the version of you that tried, that tolerated, that stayed. And that absence haunts them more than your presence ever did. You didn't disappear because you were defeated. You disappeared because you finally understood there's nothing to gain in proving your worth to the unworthy. You saved your breath. You saved your energy. And now every ounce of that saved strength is being poured into your growth. Your silence was not the end of your voice, it was the beginning of your power. Let them wonder. Let them regret. But never go back to explain. They heard your silence. Now let them live with what it really meant. There comes a moment when the silence isn't just a choice. It becomes your final answer. Not because you don't have more to say, but because you finally accept the truth. They're not worth another word. You see them clearly now. The illusion is gone, and with that clarity comes a peace that no explanation could ever match. You no longer seek to be understood by those who twisted your kindness. You no longer need to prove your loyalty to people who mistook it for weakness. You watched long enough, you listened long enough, and what they thought you didn't see, you saw with painful precision. That's what they don't realize. While they were busy hiding their intentions, you were feeling every shift, reading every silence, decoding every glance. You weren't silent because you didn't notice. You were silent because there was nothing left to ask, nothing left to fix, nothing left to hope for. And the moment you stopped hoping is the moment you started healing. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, deeply, permanently. There is power in choosing not to participate in your own disrespect, power in no longer being available for games, manipulation, or surface-level apologies. You no longer fall for patterns dressed up as promises. You no longer accept effort in words that never translate into action. Your silence is no longer a pause, it's a boundary so solid it doesn't need defending. You've outgrown the need to be loud, because now you're walking in a different direction, one that doesn't require their approval. One that doesn't revolve around their behavior. You gave chances when you didn't have to. You gave grace when it wasn't returned. You waited for change that never came. And now you've stopped waiting, not because you're bitter, but because you're wiser. Because nothing is louder than the realization that you deserve better than confusion, better than half-truths, better than being an option in someone else's story. You deserve consistency, honesty, and peace. And if your silence is what it takes to protect that peace, then let it be permanent. Let them sit with the emptiness they created. Let them echo in the space where your voice used to fill the room. You gave more than you received. You stayed longer than you should have. But not anymore. Now you move in silence. Not out of anger, but out of strength. Because silence is no longer your retreat, it's your revolution. Every second you withhold your reaction, you reclaim your power. Every moment you don't respond, you build your future. A future not built on begging to be seen, but on fully seeing yourself. You saw it all. You just chose not to speak. And in that choice, you broke a cycle. You freed yourself. You transformed. No more warnings. No more second chances. No more wasted words. Just distance. Just clarity. Just power. The kind that only silence can build and only peace can sustain. There's a certain kind of strength that only shows itself in silence. It doesn't come from shouting or proving a point. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to lower yourself to the level of those who tried to break you. You don't need to explain why you left. You don't need to justify why you stopped responding. When respect is gone, words are wasted. And once you've seen the truth behind the masks, pretending becomes impossible. You weren't silent because you lacked the courage to speak. You were silent because you finally found the courage to walk away. They thought you didn't notice because you never brought it up. But what they didn't see is that you noticed everything. The shifts in energy, the withdrawal of effort, the passive-aggressive tones, the patterns of dishonesty. You were paying attention long before you made your decision. And by the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. You were done, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Not with drama, not with revenge, just done. That kind of ending doesn't need closure. It doesn't need confrontation. It needs distance. Not just physical, but emotional. Because once your soul disconnects, the damage is irreversible. You stop asking why. You stop hoping for change. You stop holding on to potential that never shows up. Instead, you let go. Not to punish them, but to protect you. That's when the real transformation begins. When your silence becomes sacred. When your absence becomes your answer. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. You weren't demanding control. You were expecting respect. You gave your time, your trust, your attention, and all they had to do was value it. But they didn't. They underestimated you. They thought your kindness was compliance. They thought your forgiveness was forgetfulness. But now they see. Silence is not forgetting. Silence is remembering without reacting. It's knowing without warning. It's seeing everything and still choosing to rise above it. Your evolution doesn't require their applause. It requires your discipline. The discipline to no longer engage. The discipline to walk away when staying means betraying yourself. The discipline to remain calm while others try to provoke chaos. Because peace isn't given, it's built. And the cost of that peace is letting go of anything that keeps dragging you backward. You don't need revenge, you need growth. You don't need their regret, you need your freedom. And that freedom is found in silence. Let them wonder what you saw. Let them question why you left. Let them sit in the confusion they created. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them clarity. You owe yourself peace. And the moment you chose that peace, everything began to change. Your silence isn't weakness. It's a sign that you've outgrown the noise, that you've stepped into a version of yourself that no longer begs to be heard, because now your presence speaks for itself. There is something deeply unsettling to those who rely on control when you stop responding. When your silence replaces your reactions, when your distance replaces your explanations, they lose their power, not because you took it from them, but because they never had it to begin with. You were just giving it away, giving your time, your energy, your attention, hoping it would be respected, hoping it would be matched. But once you realized you were the only one trying, the silence became easy, natural, necessary. You stopped chasing understanding and started embracing truth. This kind of silence doesn't come from weakness. It's born from exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that only comes from caring too much for too long. You reach a point where words feel empty, defending yourself feels pointless, and being available feels like self-betrayal. That's when the shift happens, not with a dramatic goodbye, not with a loud declaration, just a quiet choice to no longer participate in what drains your soul. And that choice, though silent, changes everything. They don't notice at first. They think you're just in a mood. They think you'll come back like always, but you don't. Because this time, it's different. This time, the silence isn't temporary. It's not a pause, it's a boundary. It's the result of too many overlooked moments, too many conversations that went nowhere. Too many times you swallowed your feelings just to keep the peace. And peace built on suppression is not peace, it's a slow collapse. So you stop collapsing, you start standing. And in that stillness, you rise. The most powerful version of you isn't the one that argues. It's the one that no longer needs to. Because you see clearly now, you see how much you gave. You see how little they valued it. And you see finally that love without respect isn't love. It's emotional labor. Attention without sincerity is manipulation. Promises without consistency are distractions. So you stop giving the benefit of the doubt to those who keep proving they don't deserve it. And the silence becomes your healing. Every second you don't react is a step forward. Every time you withhold your words, you build your resolve. And every time you walk away instead of engaging, you prove to yourself that you've grown. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer need their acknowledgement to feel seen. Because you've started seeing yourself. And once that vision is clear, no lie, no excuse, no manipulation can blind you again. Let them live in the silence they created. Let them feel the weight of your absence, not because you're punishing them, but because you're finally choosing you, choosing peace over chaos, dignity over drama, truth over illusion. And in that choice, you reclaim the one thing they could never touch, your power. Not loud, not aggressive, just unshakable, just undeniable. Just you, fully awake, finally done, and forever free. They didn't expect the silence to last. They thought you were just giving them space. They thought your quiet was temporary, a momentary retreat before you returned to the cycle. But what they didn't understand is that your silence wasn't a pause. It was a decision, a final internal shift, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't warn, doesn't ask for attention. It just happens, quietly, fully, permanently, because something inside of you broke, not from weakness, but from the weight of trying to hold together something that was never yours to fix. People often don't realize how loud their disrespect becomes when you stop speaking. When your presence fades and your voice goes still, the truth they buried starts to surface. Not because you uncovered it, but because they no longer have your energy to distract from it. Without your attention, their mask slips. Without your forgiveness, their ego cracks. And without your presence, their games lose meaning. Your silence exposes everything they tried to hide. It reflects their actions back to them with painful clarity. You didn't disappear to be chased. You didn't fall silent to be missed. You did it because your peace demanded it. Because the version of you that once tolerated half love, half effort, and half truths no longer exists. Growth erased it. Self-respect replaced it. And now, the silence they used to control you has become the silence that frees you. You don't need to shout your value. You don't need to defend your worth. You simply remove yourself. And in that removal, your voice becomes deafening. This is the strength they didn't expect. They thought your patience would never run out. They thought your heart would keep giving no matter how empty they left you. But now, the version of you that stayed, explained, and endured has been buried under the silence of a person reborn. And rebirth doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait to be understood. It doesn't seek validation from the same hands that once fractured its spirit. It simply emerges, fierce, whole, unapologetically calm. There's no regret in the silence you chose. Only clarity, only power, only space to breathe again. Because the moment you stopped speaking was the moment you stopped negotiating your value. No more bending, no more waiting, no more accepting less than you give. You didn't lose them. You found you, and the version of you they thought they could manipulate no longer lives in your skin. That version has been replaced by someone who knows their power doesn't need to be explained to be real. Let them wonder how they lost you. Let them sit in the silence they never thought would come. You've said all there is to say, not in words, but in distance, in stillness, in peace. And now that silence is your strength, your boundary, your truth. And for those who once mistook your quiet for blindness, let your silence be the loudest reminder. You saw everything, and now you're done speaking. Forever louder in your absence than you ever were in your presence. They never thought the day would come when you stopped trying. They didn't believe your silence would last because they were used to your return, used to your forgiveness, used to your heart bending in places it should have broken. They relied on your compassion as if it was endless. They believed they could act carelessly and you would still be there, mending, explaining, staying, but they were wrong. There's a point when even the kindest soul outgrows the weight of being ignored, underestimated, or dismissed. And when that point arrives, it doesn't make a scene. It just ends what no longer honors your spirit. They don't see the silent battles you fought within yourself, the arguments you never voiced, the pain you carried without complaint, the disappointments you buried beneath a calm face. You tolerated more than you ever should have, not because you were weak, but because you believed in potential. You believed in change. You held on, hoping they'd wake up. But instead of rising with you, they pulled you down. And now, your silence is not an absence. It's a boundary. A hard-earned one. Silence is not passive. It's not a void. It's the loudest refusal you'll ever make. When you stop speaking, you strip their control. You remove the attention that fed their ego. You reclaim the energy they thought they were entitled to. And in doing so, you reveal something far more powerful than anger. Indifference. Because the opposite of love isn't hate. It's detachment. It's when you no longer care enough to react. That's the kind of silence that pierces deeper than any words ever could. Your silence is sacred now. It's your guardrail. It protects your healing, your vision, your focus. It blocks out the noise of false apologies, empty promises, and manipulative games. It keeps you centered while others spin in circles. You no longer operate on the surface. You've gone inward, built strength in solitude, and found peace in letting go. And that peace, it cost you everything you were willing to lose, everything that kept you small, everything that required you to betray yourself just to be accepted. There's nothing weak about walking away without a sound, nothing passive about cutting ties with grace. That's not giving up. That's growth. That's mastery. That's what it looks like when someone chooses to protect their soul instead of feed dysfunction. And now, your presence is reserved. Your access is limited. Your energy is no longer a free offering. It's earned through honesty, through respect, through alignment. Because you've seen what happens when you hand your heart to the unready, and you vow to never do it again. So let them misinterpret your silence. Let them invent stories. Let them wonder why you vanished. You owe no explanation. You owe no performance. You owe only truth to yourself. And the truth is simple. You saw it all. You chose not to speak. And in that choice, you reclaimed everything they thought you would keep giving forever. They never imagined your silence would become permanent. They thought it was a phase, a moment, a reaction. But it wasn't. It was revelation. The moment you realized you didn't need to yell to be heard. You didn't need to argue to prove your point. You didn't need to plead for what you had already earned through loyalty, through patience, through presence. Your silence became your answer, your escape, your protection, not from them, but from ever forgetting your worth again. There is something unshakable in the way you stopped showing up for people who repeatedly chose their comfort over your clarity. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, everything shifted. You became unavailable to confusion, unavailable to manipulation, unavailable to anyone who thought you would always return no matter how little they gave. You broke their pattern. You walked away from the dynamic they relied on to feel powerful. And that shift, though silent, was louder than anything you could have said. When you remove your energy from people who misuse it, they begin to realize what they lost. Not in your absence alone, but in the space your silence creates. The space where they're forced to face the version of themselves they could hide when you were always there. You were the distraction from their guilt, the cover for their selfishness, the cushion for their irresponsibility. But not anymore, because now the weight of accountability is all they have. And you didn't have to scream to deliver it. You just had to leave. You no longer waste time trying to translate your heart to people who speak in deception. You no longer tolerate emotional guesswork. You no longer participate in relationships where love is treated like leverage and communication is used to confuse rather than connect. That's why your silence feels like a storm. It's not passive. It's not empty. It's filled with truth, with boundaries, with every moment you let slide until you no longer could. You gave chances that drained you. You extended grace they never earned. You bent so far you lost sight of yourself. But not anymore, because now you're rooted, you're clear, you're done. And what they mistook for silence was the sound of you reclaiming your life, the sound of you building peace alone, the sound of you learning that quiet isn't absence, it's evolution. You don't need closure. You don't need apologies. You don't need anyone to suddenly realize your value after they dismissed it. Your validation is no longer outsourced. Your power is no longer handed over for the sake of belonging. You belong to yourself now, fully, completely, irreversibly. And from that place of quiet strength, everything becomes louder. Your presence, your decisions, your growth. They may not hear your voice anymore, but your silence echoes. Through every missed call, every unanswered message, every day they feel the absence of what they once took for granted. You saw it all. You said nothing. And now, your silence speaks louder than they ever did. Silence is not the absence of emotion. It is the full expression of everything you felt. Everything you endured, everything you finally chose to stop carrying. When words became useless, your silence became sacred. You weren't looking to punish anyone. You weren't playing games. You simply realized the most powerful response you could give was no response at all. That when you withhold your words, you protect your peace. And when you protect your peace, you realign with your power. You no longer feel obligated to keep showing up where respect has expired. You watched long enough. You listened long enough. And in that silence, you began to understand something deeper than anger. You understood that not everyone deserves access to your mind. Not everyone is entitled to your emotions. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your thoughts or feel your presence. You learned that silence isn't just what happens when you stop speaking. It's what happens when you start valuing your energy. And once that lesson is learned, you never speak the same again. The truth is, not reacting is harder than reacting. It takes strength to stay calm when chaos tempts you. It takes discipline to walk away when you could easily engage. And it takes maturity to recognize that peace is worth more than proving a point. You realize the battle wasn't worth the wound, the conversation wasn't worth the cycle, and your peace wasn't worth the noise. You didn't lose anything when you went silent. You gained everything you thought you'd find in them. You found it in yourself. That's the shift they never saw coming. They expected you to break, to reach back out, to chase, to beg. But you didn't, because you were too busy rebuilding. While they waited for a reaction, you were reconstructing your standards, restoring your boundaries, and redefining what you will never again tolerate. They thought silence meant defeat, but your silence was a declaration, a vow to never lower yourself to meet them in the shallow places where games are played and respect is lost. You stopped explaining yourself to people who never listened. You stopped fighting for space in rooms where you were only ever tolerated, and you stopped dimming your light for people who were never blinded by it, only bothered. Because you finally saw yourself clearly. And when you see yourself clearly, you stop settling for half-hearted connections and emotionally inconsistent behavior. You no longer beg to be understood. You simply become undeniable. Now they feel what they never imagined they would. Your absence. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. And in that void, they're left with nothing but their own echo. Because you're not there to soften the blow or carry the weight. You're not there to explain away their behavior or give them one more chance. You are gone in the most powerful way a person can be gone. Without chaos, without warning, without regret. Just silence. Full, final, free. They're starting to understand what your silence truly means. It's not distance. It's not pettiness. It's not some emotional stunt. It's the result of waking up, of looking at the wreckage of repeated disrespect and finally saying, no more. Because silence isn't about avoidance. It's about alignment. You chose to align with your peace, your standards, your healing. And in doing that, you had to let go of the noise, the drama, the cycle, the people who only loved the version of you they could manipulate. You never needed to make a scene. You never needed to prove how much you were hurting. The fact that you left without explaining was the message. And now, in the emptiness where your voice used to echo, they feel what you once felt, unseen, unheard, unvalued. But the difference is, your silence was born from love. Theirs was born from ego, and love will always walk away when it's no longer respected. That's what they didn't see coming. You walked away not to cause pain, but to protect yourself from more of it. You gave your best when no one was watching. You were loyal when no one asked you to be. You stayed silent through moments that deserved a reaction, and they mistook that grace for weakness. But grace has a limit. Even patience has a line. And once that line is crossed, the version of you they once knew is gone. Not bitter, not broken, just unavailable. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't return to it. And once you choose yourself, you never again hand over your voice to those who only want to silence it. You are not who you were when you first tolerated that treatment. You're not who you were when you kept forgiving without change. You've evolved. Your silence has matured into wisdom. Your absence has become your protection. And your decision to say nothing now echoes louder than all the arguments they expected. Because the most powerful change isn't something you announce, it's something you become. You became the person who no longer needs to be heard to feel powerful. You found your strength in stillness. Let them feel the weight of everything they thought you didn't notice. Every little moment they thought passed by without consequence. Let them sit in the discomfort of your silence and realize that actions have echoes. You may not have said a word, but you spoke in boundaries. You spoke in detachment. You spoke in self-respect. And now your peace is louder than their excuses. Your calm is stronger than their chaos. You don't go backwards. You don't chase closure. You don't revisit what you had to heal from. You stay silent not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Clear on what you deserve. Clear on who you are, clear on the fact that you never needed to raise your voice to be heard. You just needed to stop speaking to those who refuse to listen. When you finally go quiet, people don't just hear your silence. They feel it. It disrupts them. It unsettles the story they told themselves where they were always in control. They relied on your voice to soften the impact of their choices. They expected you to always respond, always return, always rescue what they kept breaking. But silence removes that safety net. It forces them to face the wreckage they caused without your comfort to shield them from it. That's when they begin to realize the silence they ignored has become the consequence they can't escape. You used to speak because you cared. You explained, defended, pleaded, because your heart was open. But after a while, you learned. You learned that not everyone listens with the intent to understand. Some listen to deny, to manipulate, to protect their pride. And that realization changed you. It didn't harden you, it cleared you. It stripped away the false hope. It peeled back the layers of illusion. And beneath all of that noise, you found your truth. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. The moment you stopped giving them your voice, you started hearing your own needs, your own boundaries, your own power. And what you heard was unshakable. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were simply in a place where being good was mistaken for being easy to use. But you're not easy to use anymore. You're not easy to access. Not because you built walls, but because you've built standards. And that changes everything. They thought they'd always have you because they confused your loyalty with dependency. But loyalty without reciprocity becomes self-betrayal. And the silence you chose wasn't about punishing them. It was about saving yourself. Because no amount of explaining can fix what someone is committed to misunderstanding. No amount of effort can heal what someone keeps cutting. So instead of repeating yourself, you removed yourself. And that choice, though quiet, was louder than any confrontation ever could be. You stopped asking to be heard. You stopped begging to be seen. You stopped shrinking to fit into spaces that never made room for your truth. And in that decision, you didn't just reclaim your voice, you reclaimed your life. You discovered that silence isn't emptiness. It's clarity, it's peace, it's protection. And now, every day you stay silent is a day you stay free. Free from the lies, free from the cycles, free from the weight of trying to fix what was never yours to carry. Let them wonder. Let them rewind the moments they thought didn't matter. You don't need to explain why you're gone. Your absence explains it for you. You don't need to raise your voice. Your silence is already louder than anything they've ever said. Because now they know you saw it all. You just chose not to say a word. And that was the loudest truth of all. Silence doesn't ask for recognition, but it demands respect. It carries the weight of everything you never said, everything you endured, everything you chose to let go of without needing to be seen as the victim. That's what makes it so powerful. It isn't weakness. It's restraint. It's wisdom. It's the decision to stop watering dead things. You gave your time, your love, your patience. And when none of it was honored, you didn't erupt. You didn't lash out. You just stopped. Quietly, completely. With a grace that only those who have suffered in silence can understand. And the moment you stopped giving them your voice, they lost their power. Not because you made them pay, but because you finally understood they never deserved your energy in the first place. You broke the pattern not with fury, but with indifference. You shattered the illusion not with words, but with your absence. And nothing is more terrifying to someone who once controlled your emotions than the moment they realize they can no longer access them. Your silence became your reset. The place where healing began, the place where your heart could finally breathe without the pressure to prove its worth. Because you were never too emotional, never too dramatic, never too sensitive. You were just surrounded by people who refused to take responsibility, who weaponized your emotions against you, who twisted your reactions to make you question your sanity. So you learned to stop defending yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You learned to stop pleading with those who only listened when it served them. And most of all, you learned that peace isn't found in fixing others. It's found in freeing yourself. You don't owe anyone access to your soul. Not if they've shown they can't protect it. Not if they've proven they only show up when it benefits them. You owe yourself something greater. You owe yourself truth, loyalty, boundaries, peace. And all of that begins in the quiet. In the moments when you stop engaging with chaos and start choosing solitude. Because solitude heals what noise damages. It teaches you that silence isn't lonely, it's sacred. Now, they look for reactions that will never come. They wait for words that will never be spoken. They scroll through memories that no longer define you, because you've moved on, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Out of a deep knowing that not everyone gets a second chance to hurt you. Some things aren't healed with conversations. They're healed with distance, with space, with silence.